Okay, welcome everyone to the March 24th meeting of the Columbus City Schools Audit and Accountability Committee. Madam Auditor, would you mind taking the roll?
Chair Beckerly,
Here.
Ms. Vera, Mr. Grant, Mr. Vajon, Ms. Reyes, Mr. Jordan,
Here?
Mr. Daniel.
Here.
We currently do not have a quorum.
Okay, well, we're expecting Board Member Vera any minute, and then we will have a quorum, and we can circle back and approve the minutes. In the meantime, let's go to item 1, committee operations. And do we have to move to untable? Or we could,
That we probably,
I'm just, because it says motion to untable. I mean, we definitely moved to table it last
Okay,
time,
so
so we
we
must
moved
have
to
to move to
table.
untable.
you know, so
Okay, so
So moved. Second.
we can't, we don't have a
We have a
quorum.
quorum, that's right.
Oh, yeah.
So we'll, what's your thought,
we can continue
Carolyn?
the discussion on the
Yeah.
district management presentation.
I was trying to decide whether to do that or drop down to one of the others and come back. Okay, so let's go to the second item under Section 1, Committee Operations, and continue the discussion of district management's presentations.
Okay,
Madam Auditor, take it away.
okay, because I missed the last meeting, I'm going to ask Mr. O'Connor. Kevin, can you start us off on where we left off at that discussion on the committee operations?
I can. We had good conversation. Good afternoon, everybody, first of all.
Hello.
We had good conversation about that. Yes, Carolyn.
I just said hello. Sorry.
Oh, I apologize.
That's okay.
Yeah, and we had talked about a couple different scenarios. One, talking about management coming to the table and talking about risk and mitigation strategies. And then Mr. Jordan brought up an enterprise-wide risk presentation that might affect multiple departments with an overarching theme and doing things like that. I think, excuse me, Mr. Grant and Mr. Daniel also would like the departments to come to the table to give a little more background information on the risks that affect them. And those were all the things that we had discussed before we stopped because we didn't want to go too far without you there, Carolyn.
One of the things that I had identified on the agenda was our emerging risk, and you can all let me know if this is kind of in line with what you all are thinking. From the alignment document that I shared that was shared last meeting, and it showed that most organizations are concerned about talent management. And I do know that we do have some key openings in our organization revolving talent management. So keeping in line with what I'm thinking I'm hearing, instead of just having the individual department, let's just say safety and security, because there's some key openings in that area, come and talk about that, it would make more sense to have HR and the effective departments come and do something. And I'm open to hear the feedback on that, because I want to make sure that what we're bringing is meaningful to the committee.
I know my thoughts were if we would try to get some quote-unquote economies of scale, looking at the range of a risk, especially when they affect different departments kind of the same ways, to just get some efficiencies from that standpoint. And I think that'd also be more effective, because that kind of have flows and snowballs from that standpoint. That's what my thoughts were on it.
And when you say that, are you talking, can you give an example, just so I'm clear on, like, something that affects more than one? I mean, we talked about those SOC reports, and I don't quite understand.
Computer risk.
Okay.
Something, computer risk would be a good example.
Yeah, I would add to Mr. Daniels' comment, so you could take talent management and succession planning from a governance perspective and say, what does HR have for a policy or practice that transcends all the various departments? And then each of those departments could have a look into, okay, what does the depth of talent look like for key roles in grounds and maintenance? And you could take each individual area and have that view and look for where you might have single points of failure or not. You might need to have more experience. So that would be one example. And the second one might be to Mr. Daniels' point of, we look at user access across the entire spectrum. What are our governance policies and procedures around user access, and how are they implemented and managed at each local departmental level?
Okay, so in the scenario where we might not have a policy, and we have identified throughout the years as those items being risk, is it the committee's vision that just take succession planning, that it would be identified as a risk because, let's just say, we do not have a policy. HR would work on that policy and identify, and we as management would identify our individual succession plans, and then HR would come back at a later date and bring that, and it'll be representative of the entire enterprise as far as how that risk has been. We've identified it, they've worked on it, it's been mitigated, and then it would come back to the committee, and then also to the board through one of my reports. Is that the vision, or?
Yeah, I'm wondering about that too, because I was thinking that we were thinking about, to your vision that I think was consistent with what Mr. Jordan, Mr. Daniel was saying, if we took succession planning, that we would ask, I thought we were saying we would ask them to come, so say grounds and maintenance, buildings and grounds, and HR to figure out what their plan is or isn't, or how they handle succession, and share it with us. But you're thinking about doing this at a committee meeting? Or are we asking Carolyn?
I think it could be an individual audit with
Okay.
that. Chair Berkeley, I think the question would be, if we know there's a gap in the governance structure, that's okay. That'd be identified issue concern to be rated by what it feels. But in the interim, if it's a concern and a systemic risk, which it sounds like it might be, not drawing conclusions, then how are each of the individual key departments addressing that risk individually without the governance framework? They have to be thinking about it.
They're doing it to some degree.
Yeah, there may be we may find some other gaps or concerns at that, I'll call it the local level.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I think we started out talking about what would be good uses of our time at the meeting and whether these reports were helpful or not. Now we're, I think, migrating into a very, very useful conversation about maybe a slightly different way to prioritize the work.
Well,
Am I following? Is that accurate, what I'm saying?
My thoughts were not prioritizing the work, but just presentation purposes. Go ahead and let Carolyn do what she's done with her department, but as far as presentations are concerned.
Okay, so you were thinking presentation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I maybe just to play off of that again, I think it would be helpful if over the course of, say, a year, we cycled through grounds and maintenance, we cycled through transportation. They gave us an overview of their operations, of their organizational structure, what are the key risks and processes that they have in place, and we'd have a little deeper dive. And maybe it could be, how does internal audit view those individual activities? Where are they in the audit universe? What recent audits have been performed, results? And if you play that through a course of a year, maybe it's 15 months, you'll have cycled through the whole entire district and get a better understanding of the district, its operations, control environment. That's just my thought.
Okay, except the whole way we started down this path is that we wanted to make sure that, because we kind of have been doing that already, haven't we?
Yeah, when we do our risk assessment, we identify our audit universe, and we identify the various departments and we identify the subsets of those departments, and personnel is always one of those subsets. But we have identified in the past that there is not documented succession plans.
But more about how we structure our meetings before we get into the nitty-gritty of that topic. Because if we started down this path by saying, we don't want to just have, say, I mean, I know that the legal operation came at some point last year and kind of gave us an assessment of their risk. We had operations come, and there were sort of these sanitized efforts to present their thing that didn't really seem to be moving the ball substantively, and it was taking a lot of time of staff. So I was saying, how can we structure our time in these meetings to be really targeted and not just kind of have everybody come in and give their 10 slides or their 15 slides, and this is where we think the audit are, and we're not really, either we as a committee, and more importantly, our community members are not particularly gaining any insight, and we're putting our staff through a lot of effort that's taking them away from their day-to-day. And so if we're coming back to, that's important for our community members to be able to, over the course of 15 months, have a sense of how we're structured and to be able to ask some questions of individual partners, and it's worthwhile time, then we should by all means do it. It kind of sounds to me like after going full circle, we're coming back to that conclusion. Am I missing something, or is that kind of?
That was my initial question when I reached out to the members, as far as, okay, we've had this calendar of activities set up for a while, where different departments will come in, they'll do a presentation, and safety and security will come, IT will come.
IT, right.
The CFO comes.
Legal did.
Legal. And my question was, are the presentations as delivered meeting what the committee feels that they need the presentations to be? To understand what the risks are and what the departments are doing to address those risks.
And then I thought from that, we came to the idea of, well, maybe if we picked a topic that has systems-wise implication. We talked about Munis. At some point, you guys were talking about SOC reports, which I really don't entirely understand, or the succession planning.
Or third-party risk, I think, was SOCs were a control within third-party risk.
And then we said, well, let's ask them to focus on that, because then we're seeing it through each segment of the organization. And then we as a committee, and you, in terms of your department, can develop a sense of, well, that's really, maybe we should, focus on that, because that's, or maybe even just by virtue of them preparing it, they start, we start seeing some synergies or some ways to interface better, or that it was a more meaningful discussion. And that's where I think we left off. And I could see succession planning being a really good example of that. And as Carolyn said, so HR and safety and security come together and say, well, this is our succession plan, or this is our lack of a succession plan, and what do you think? But now, at that point, I'm not sure whether that's a meaningful discussion in front of the board, or whether that's just something we should be tasking our organization with doing. So I'm coming full circle.
And if I can just jump in here, succession planning, and we're in the process of doing the risk assessment, but because of the challenges that I know other organizations have faced, it will most likely be on our work plan this year. Mm-hmm. And I don't have the steps in front of me, but I would imagine it won't just be a conversation with one department. It will probably start at that, policy level. It will probably start, okay, do we have one? And if we do, is it sufficient to prepare us for when someone leaves? So at that point, because it would be an audit, at some point it would come before this committee. But I'm thinking that would be separate from the committee presentations.
That's exactly what
that's where I want to make sure.
I see two different things.
Yeah.
And we get Mr. Daniels' perspective. It's been a little while, maybe my memory's bad, that we've had sort of the deep dive by the departments.
It's been a while.
Yeah, so I do think it's helpful that over whatever cycle is appropriate to have, this is the overview of the operations, this is the structures, these are the folks who operate, these are the key risks that we're dealing with, and maybe not so much into controls, and it may then dovetail, you could break up, Carolyn, sort of your annual risk assessment could also just be a point in time, here's how we also view the risk of transportation, for example, and here's work we've done in the past 12 months, work we may think in the next 12 months. The next meeting, it's another department that does that. But I do think you're on the right area here. If we think there are top risks to the district, and whether it's cybersecurity, whether it's succession planning, risk of inflation, I think it's appropriate to have the dialogue about how you and your team view that risk and how might that work into your plan that covers district-wide, not to wait until it's department by department, but it's more of a systemic, I guess, risk that will cut across the district.
Okay, so that's a
does
little
that
bit
help?
more about how we approach the audit plan, that latter point, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the former is, I think we're circling back on continuing to ask the different departments to come in and share.
Yeah, and I think that shows a good alignment between how internal audit views the risk with it, and they're aligned with the various district leaders on how they view the risk, and
That's the conversation to have.
yeah,
Okay.
that's my perspective at least.
Are they in sync about the relative risks and how they each view them?
And that is something that we are working on doing in the near future. I'm not going to say, within this calendar year,
Yeah.
but we are looking to do something very similar to the infograph that was shared at the last meeting. We're looking to do something very similar amongst our leadership to make sure that internal audit and the chief executive officer and the board and the CFO, where do we all see it? And if there's a really major misalignment, then we can work on that. But we haven't done their exercise, so I can't say.
Yeah, I mean, it's a marathon, not a sprint. I mean, it's going to take, it's a
Right.
journey.
Right.
All right, so now another thought that's just occurring to me. When we talked about that first line, second line, should we task each department as they come up and cycle out to kind of identify how they're approaching that, or if they're approaching that, or should that be part of our conversation when they come before us? Or is that another whole?
I think that might be part of the marathon.
Yeah, no, yeah, but do we start to integrate it into the marathon?
I would be hesitant to speak on behalf of cabinet. I would like to have a conversation with.
Okay,
with
so we'll
Dr.
put a pin in that first, or just a thought.
Right.
Okay. But on the other topic of, do we want to have periodic presentations from the departments, we are putting that to bed. I will not bring it up again, and the answer is yes.
Yes.
And it might be over a 15-month period, but that we find it helpful.
And what we.
Forever, I shall be quiet.
Well, and I think the other benefit, once that cycle is complete, Chair Beckley, I think then that becomes another good onboarding package for new board members or new committee members. So here's the operations, here's some deep dives just from a good background.
In terms of going back and looking at old meetings, or
No, so if somebody
just the slide deck?
replaces me eventually
Right.
on the committee, would have, some number of presentations and say,
Okay,
well,
that's what-
here's a
yeah,
way
got
we
it, got it,
onboard you,
right.
here's how the district operates, just get you up to speed quicker.
Right, the other thing that I would maybe humbly suggest, never mind, I'm not saying anymore, we're sticking with it, because I'll beat it to death. I was thinking about flipping the classroom and having them get the slides to us first, and we just dive into a conversation rather than having them go slide by slide, but.
Okay, so we.
Dan, you have anything to say? I see you.
Yeah.
I see you.
Yes.
I certainly do. Speaking as a non-auditor person, and we've been talking about risk assessment for a long, long time. I don't know how many other departments have gone through what my department's gone through and actually contracting to have the first risk assessment done for my department. That was a great learning curve. And I guess I would suggest that prior to this committee, requesting that other departments come before them with some form of a risk assessment evaluation, that we all need a lot of professional development, some education of what risk assessment really means. And I think to simply reach out to departmental managers and say, here's a framework. Here are those, I forget what that model was that Carolyn shared that you might be referencing, Chair Beckerly. But I think they need to be taught a lot about what the risk assessment is, what the process is, and so that we can better understand what the end game is. Because I think that this is likely to be very, very new to folks. And I think your output, your results, the deliverable at the end of each department doing a risk assessment would be a lot better if we got some training. And I know we learned a lot when we went through that process, and we are engaged in continuing down the path, and it is a marathon. But that's my only suggestion is, rather than jump to, hey, come give us a report, have a period of time where there's some learning and education going on.
That's really good input.
And thanks, Stan. Actually, that's a conversation that I've been having with Dr. Dixon, and we've been talking about how to introduce the whole enterprise risk management, which will cover the risk assessment to the district. So we are definitely aware that it's going to be a lot of education that's going to happen. And my team is definitely, we've talked about what our role would be as far as working with our individual segment, the different segments that each individual has. So no, we're not expecting to, just tell everyone to come and be prepared to talk about their risk without any type of training. But no, that's a good point, and we are having those conversations with Dr. Dixon, and when she's, ready, I'm quite sure she'll bring it to cabinet and then kind of disperse it out that way.
So I think that what I'm hearing is a much more meaningful presentation if we make sure that we've given whatever organization is preparing, whatever department, some training up front about how to think about risk, how to, rather than just
Come and present.
right, using their common sense, like there's a way of thinking about it.
Yes.
There's probably a path where, think of continuous risk assessments, so maybe the first presentation, again, making up numbers or dates, is 3 months from now, or 2 months from now. Then over the course of that period of time, Carolyn, your team can work with that leadership group on collaboratively a risk assessment, because you'll need their input. They can learn from how your team thinks, and it's a joint presentation. Then we go to the next one, is that same few-month process, and it's a marathon. And that, but I think your risk assessment will be so much more robust because you'll have even more insights from the operational side of it.
Yeah, what we had talked about briefly with my team was once we get ready to have some type of templates or things for them to be sure to include, as they're doing these presentations. So it'll be
Did you think about
consistent,
that? Did you think about that? Yeah.
throughout. So we've given it some thought, and I just wanted to make sure that we were all on the same page as far as the presentations that are going to be coming to the committee, and that, it's not going to be something that comes next month.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
I like this a lot, where you're working together to create it, and it comes to us jointly. It's your organization and whatever organization is doing the presenting. It'll be some of this is what our operation is about, and this is how we function, to give the whole committee background in the department, but then switching to, this is what we, internal audit and the department, have come up with as our risks. Is that where you're going, Stan?
Yeah, I mean, I think that risk assessment is like any other strategic initiative the district may take on, and you need to make sure that A, it's a direction you want to go. B, there's high-level organizational commitment to it, and then C, there's a broad understanding of how all that fits so that the work on this particular initiative doesn't become something that we do kind of as a one-off and only when Carolyn and her team calls and bugs us about it. I think you want it to be incorporated in the general thought process, if you will, of how the district operates, as opposed again to being one-offs and, oh, here comes Kevin O'Connor again, and he's going to ask us about risk assessment. And so we'll check. You don't want us just checking the boxes on this. And I think that comes from that high-level commitment, and then some education and understanding how all those people think about all the time, Chair Beckerly, that we're spending on goals and guardrails, and so that everybody understands how this all fits together. I think this is one of those initiatives that if you want it to be successful, just my opinion, it should get that kind of a commitment. And I can just say what we're learning in what we've done. You know, it's a fairly steep curve, learning not only how and what risk assessment is, but then how does that impact our operations? Where does it fit? Where is the value add in doing the risk assessment? And I think once you get that, you'll get that buy-in. Does that help?
Yeah, that helps. Although that does suggest that it's more than, if it's going to be more than a one of, it's part of it is to and this might be a cart before the horse thing, but it would be the place where we would integrate that second line. If we were, you know, what would it look like? Or maybe we just start talking about it for this first round, or. Because the second line is the work that keeps going, right?
Yeah, well, at some point, once I get some feedback on the initial presentation. The initial presentation includes, you know, the 3 lines of defense and, you know, risk assessment and ERM and how it all ties together. But like I said, I don't want to put the cart before the horse. And I definitely want to have the conversation with Dr. Dixon. I kind of sent her the presentation this week because I was out for a couple of weeks. So.
All right, well, let's.
But we're definitely.
We're getting there.
You know, we know the training needs to happen. We definitely know, you know, it's got to be training, and it has to be supported from leadership, you know, to.
Well, I mean, I guess to some part of it is at some point maybe we present it to the board and say, is this where you want us to go? And, you know, that we can get that sort of this is the long-term plan about how we're going to approach risk going forward.
Correct.
Okay. I guess we're going to keep talking about this, but thank you, because I think it was a really good conversation.
Yeah. I do have a quick question, Auditor. Have we done any type of assessment, to Stan's point, about the educational trainings and things? Do we know what areas that our team leaders are going to need professional development in? So have we begun to capture just, you know, as he mentioned, like really the educational components behind risk management and what their teams will be prepared to do? Do we have a sense as to what areas they're struggling in? So have we done any kind of survey collections or gotten any feedback directly from those department heads as to what types of professional development that they might need to most, you know, to be most effective for their teams?
We're at the beginning stages, so we haven't done that. We just had the very first conversation we even had with Cabinet, what might have been in December, when we talked about being more transparent with how we go about doing our risk assessment and how we use that as the basis for our work plan. So we haven't done any of, you know, any type of baseline to see where people are at and who's going to need possibly more education, who's going to need less. That Stan has already said, you know, I know his team has gone through a very extensive process. I see his team members shaking their head. So them and I would venture to say possibly Dr. Klein's area, you know, might be a little bit more ahead than others, but we haven't actually sent out surveys to see where people stand.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
All right, next item.
We can go back if you want.
Yes, let's approve the minutes from the last meeting. Does anyone have any objections? I would just say seeing no objections, or would you rather take a roll?
We can take the roll just because.
Okay, let's take a roll on the minutes from the last meeting.
Do we have a motion to?
Oh, yeah, do I have, sorry. Can someone
moved.
move? Okay,
Mr. Daniels?
Second?
Mr. Jordan, second.
Okay. Chair Beckerly,
Yes.
Ms. Vera,
Yes.
Mr. Jordan,
Yes.
Mr. Daniel,
Yes.
and the motion carries.
Okay, so the next item is to entertain a motion to untable a discussion. Although I'm not sure, do we really need to do that? Is that kind of inherent in? That was your interviews with everyone.
There were a few other things. I'm not sure if you want to.
All right, we'll go ahead and do that then.
Okay.
All right, does anyone want to make a motion to untable the discussion from the last meeting regarding Carolyn's meetings with committee members?
So moved?
And second.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Vera,
Yes.
Mr. Jordan,
Yes.
Mr. Daniel,
Yes.
Chair Beckerly.
Yes.
Okay, that motion carries.
All right.
Okay, over the winter, I was pretty busy meeting and getting feedback from all of the members on just basically the committee and the committee succession planning, and do we have the right makeup of committee members, and got a lot of good feedback. A lot of the conversation was around the reports that come to the committee, so we kind of already discussed that, and I need to take my glasses off so I can see up close. Something that was very interesting was that there was a commitment about the committee's, succession planning. And all of the committee members were very generous and said that they, at least the community members, had someone already in mind for when their time came, so I wouldn't be scrambling and putting up want ads and all that type of stuff. So I just wanted to kind of share that's pretty much covered. The other thing was there was a suggestion to consider increasing the committee members to allow for possibly 2 more members, one with academic experience and one with enterprise risk management. That's what was thrown out. And I just said, okay, I can definitely take that back. That's definitely, for the committee to consider, and then we'll go to the board. We don't have to do anything right now, but that was something that was, suggested. And I can give a little bit of background. When the committee first started, it was 5 members. I think it was 2 board members and then 3 community members. And the community members had experience in public accounting. One was the controller at OSU, and then one was a senior vice president at Nationwide in Human Resources. And then when we expanded it, we were able to bring on expertise in internal audit, which is really valuable for an audit, an audit committee. And we also were able to add education experience and IT experience. So we have considered, the needs of the committee. We have expanded it when needed. And as I said, it would be a little bit more work for me, but I think it's definitely worth it, if the committee feels that it's worth considering. We don't have to do anything with that now. I just wanted to bring that to the full committee because someone did bring it up, and I thought it was worth considering.
Well, and maybe just for a few minutes, it's worth considering if we're feeling like we're not able to address those areas because we don't have the appropriate expertise. And you said it was IT and
In education.
education.
Yeah, we brought on an internal audit. I think the person who joined us was a high official at Huntington at the time in their internal audit.
Now we have Greg.
Right. And then we later on were able to bring on IT. As our IT system became more complex in the district, we thought we needed that expertise.
And that's Mr. Vajan.
Actually, it was someone before him from
Okay.
AEP before
But
Jay Hoffman.
he's the person.
Right.
Then we have Mr. Daniels, who's from nonprofit,
Right, right,
which is a huge insight.
right, right,
Useful.
right.
Because, it's a very different beast than for-profit. So the question would be, what's the other areas? What were the areas that were suggested?
What was suggested was academic expertise and enterprise risk management. We did have Dr. Saunders on the committee for quite a few years from Franklin University. And he finally twisted my arm and said, "I'm leaving, this is it." you know. Those were just suggestions that, one of the committee members brought up.
And is that an expertise that you think you would find helpful? I feel like we lean on our committee members, well, and I so value their expertise, but I don't know that I know what we don't have,
I did a lot of times when it came to policy and procedures and then academic as far as, Dr. Saunders was really the one who really suggested that we have our very first enterprise risks assessment done. It wasn't a full-blown enterprise risk assessment, but he was the one who, kind of like, okay, instead of these individual audits, let's go and bring somebody to come in and do an assessment of the whole organization. And through that, one of the things identified was the lack of having a COOP plan, a continuous operation, plan, and some other things. So I found that helpful. As we're going down this enterprise risk management, once again, I know we have Mr. Jordan, Mr. Grant, Mr. Daniels, they all have good experience, Mr. Vajan. If we really get into it and think that expertise would be beneficial, it might be something to consider.
Well, yeah, and I guess maybe the thought is, would it be helpful to you all taking what you know, and if we had somebody from the education audit realm or whomever who would, sometimes I'm guilty of thinking I know more than I know about that stuff, and it might be nice to have somebody who has some experience in that advising us. And I guess the question is, do you find that, does anybody say, well, gee, I wish I had somebody here I could ask X about, who would have that, and then the question is, if we think that's the case, I guess the process is we go to the full board and say we want to expand the committee. Would that must be the process?
Correct.
Okay. Any
Yeah.
thoughts one way or the other?
Perspective of one, I think we're okay on risk management. I think between Mr. Vajan, Mr. Grant, and myself for sure with that. I guess I would add another thought to it to say, what's the district's plans the next 2 to 5 years strategically? And let's say, for example, that it is going to be construction and renovation of facilities. Then you might want somebody with the construction and a facilities background to be on his, there's plenty of companies around with that. So I think that's where I would tend to lean toward.
Good thought, thank you.
So, and I think academia would be an interesting one. Where does that come from? Higher education? It'd be an interesting thought process in that. But that's what I would recommend.
Okay. That is thoughtful.
And to even add to that, I think in Ms. Smith's thoughts, and when I talk with her, to be proactive rather than reactive is what you're looking at, and edges on what Mr. Jordan said also, that we know something coming down the line. Let's make sure we have those people in place.
Yeah.
So it also.
Have that expertise.
Correct, correct.
Yeah. All right, that's really thoughtful. Thank
Yeah,
you.
and then, but what I've seen work well on other boards is there is a board self-assessment or committee self-assessment. So if there are desired skill sets across whatever spectrum goes through it, then people could go through and say, well, I have a high, medium, low experience in something like that. then you might find, to Mr. Daniels' point, you're being proactive, looking forward, that you might find the holes that you want to fill, either expand the committee, or if someone steps away, then you know what you're gonna be looking for. Then I think it's up, Chair Beckley, to what does that length of time look like? To find somebody and get them,
The lead time, you
the
do.
lead time,
Yeah.
my guess is it's probably three to 4 months, if not more.
Okay.
I just know when Mr. Hoffman left, it did take quite some time to get Mr. Badge on, someone of his caliber.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's different if the same organization that someone's here today, just for example, me, if, certainly I could get somebody else with similar background for Nationwide, but there may be a different need at that time. Maybe as again, back, you said maybe it's construction, so there may be a different insight. You may want somebody from one of the local large construction companies from a finance or audit background.
That's a really great idea. Thank you. All righty.
The other thing that was brought up was our internal audit reports could be briefer, and I'm aware of that, and we're working on it. But one thing that all of the community members did say is that they want to be a resource to the board.
Right.
And any, thing that they could do to be a resource to the board to, just let them know. And at least I appreciated hearing that from all the community members.
Oh, totally. And don't underestimate the resource you already are. You've all been invaluable. And we are grateful.
And for the most, the rest of it was about what we already discussed,
Stuff
the
we already
committee
talked about,
presentation.
yeah.
So, unless there was something that you remembered from, okay.
Okay. Moving to item 2, Office of Internal Audit Report.
Okay, I'll start off and then I'll turn it over to the appropriate staff. One of the things that we did last year was we did a school readiness report, and that was based on and once again, Mr. O'Connor, jump in here if I'm stating something that's incorrect. And that was based on a checklist that was prepared or provided from operations, and it really focused on mitigating strategies for the spread of COVID. Do we have hand sanitizers in the right locations? Are the water fountains shut off, and do we have water bottles? It really was that type of readiness. It wasn't like looking at personnel readiness. So if we were to do something like this in the future, I would at least want to make sure that we all have one understanding of what readiness looks like. And I've done a little bit of research on the web looking at different organizations, like the CDC has a document out there. Homeland Security has a document out there for safety and security. But if that's not what our district is using when they say readiness, I don't think it would be really beneficial for us to use those type of tools to go out and determine what readiness looks like. And I put this on because Chair Beckley had asked, that I add this to the agenda and we could have a conversation. But that was what we did last year.
What actually happened.
It was, yeah, that's how it happened. And I think we might have even did it after the presentation was made to the board, that we were going back to pretty much business as usual. So we weren't looking to see the dividers, on the desk and that type of readiness. We did our review based on, the checklist and the understanding that, this is what it's going to look like in 2021. And of course, it ended up looking a lot
Little bit
different,
different.
but
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that the value of this discussion is that at some point during the course of last summer, the superintendent and her staff did a really important thing, or a healthy thing, and they said, let's, engage your Office of Internal Audit to help us make sure we're ready to open. And and it turns out that some things were, reviewed and got the thumbs up, and then there were other things that weren't taken into account that led to, problems with seating charts and problems with contact tracing that became overwhelming because we had our entire staff, our entire student body in instead of only half, so the contact tracing ended up being, really burdensome. We sorted through all that and we worked through it, but the question would be, how do we present that next time? And how did we think we had done an audit to see if we were ready, and where was the gap? And I think, Mr. Jordan, you and I talked about this a little bit, and you called it, I think there was a term you used for it.
Yeah, postmortem retrospective review.
Retrospective review, right?
Yeah.
And just for the purpose of saying, what could we do, or how should we set it up differently if it were to happen next time, or what's the benefit of it, or the constructive conclusions?
Perspective again. Not trying to be hindsight's 2020.
I know. That's part of the problem
think,
too, and then we better be very mindful.
Yeah,
of that.
and I don't know all
Especially
the intricate details of the scope off the top of my head, but I would say I think I would have an expectation of internal audit to review the plan that management has presented for a readiness plan, but also do outside research, look to other experts. What does the COVID return readiness plan look like? There's a lot of literature out there, and there was a lot of literature out there prior to that, and ask the tough questions. Do you have contact tracing in place? Have we thought about transportation if folks can't teach? What about class size? What about there's a lot of things that could be drawn from that. Again, not poking at it, but I think that's what a retrospective review would give. What else could we have done differently? What if we needed more equipment? Is there a central place? Are we going to ship equipment to people's homes? Are they going to come pick it up? And just a lot of things like that. And I've spent time with a lot of organizations who've went through this process.
Okay.
And I think we've done it as well as others, but I think everybody learns from each other. But 1 year into the pandemic, there was a lot of literature out there about through multiple industries about going back to work plans. And so going forward, requests like this, I think it's great to take what management presents, but I think internal audit needs to ask the questions that need to get asked and have a critical eye to it and provide some insights. Again, not that didn't happen, but my guess is from what we saw, there are probably some opportunities to do a little deeper and more insightful review.
Yeah, what we are taking that retrospective review. We're looking at, okay, this is what we used, and this is the premise that it was used under. Looking, like I said, if we were to do something like that this year, I would be looking to see, okay, what's out there as far as best practices? What did we learn from, one thing that, like I said, we did not look at the contract tracing, and I know that did become
A huge headache.
a huge issue. So we can definitely get better ourselves, but once again, I want to make sure that we're all on the same page as far as what does readiness look like.
Right, and maybe even, and I don't mean, feel free, Colin, to jump in. I think it's even take up a step farther, and you have the COOP plan, but what are the various scenarios under which that might need to be employed, whether it be a pandemic, whether it be weather-driven, whether it be mechanical driven? There ought to be there could be some insights into how could this apply to having a playbook of broader scenarios around business continuity or district continuity plans. Would be an insight that I think would be good.
So almost like our COOP, continuous operation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we
Right.
have a.
Maybe there should be a pandemic chapter or a volume in it, and there might not have been already.
Right.
There was probably a tornado, there was probably this, there was probably that.
Yeah, organizations that responded well to COVID had business continuity plans that were probably 3/4 there, driven off the avian flu from about 15 years ago. And so, and there's organizations that have good plans that have experienced or been through physical destruction. What would you do? So I mean, scenario planning, I think, would be just an insight I would offer up. I'm glad to help, by the way. Just be careful what I ask for.
Yeah. No, I think that would be really valuable. And I think making sure that we are also hearing from the voices of the people who were frontline, like our nurses, our teachers, our building principals, our custodians, so that we really, hear a firsthand perspective of what they were seeing, frontline with our students every single day in terms of, okay, this was the plan we provided. However, how do you feel this plan really, worked or didn't work, or what areas of opportunity do we have? Because I think they will be able to really help us create,
So feed that back.
Yeah, absolutely.
And potentially the parents.
Oh,
Of students.
absolutely.
So maybe that's a more constructive use of this effort than even a retrospective. That's the word we're using.
My question would be, who would be gathering that information? I mean, like I said, as far as internal audit, I can look at, okay, this is what we did, and looking at this checklist, we knew that there was going to be a bus driver shortage, and probably still is a bus driver shortage. But we were, like I said, we were looking at the operation mitigation strategies,
And whether they had been implemented.
as far as like the ventilation and the buildings that couldn't get forgive me for not knowing the right term, but they couldn't get the one filters, what was the backup plan for that, We weren't looking at the job descriptions for the nurses to see, do we have enough to do their job and to do contract tracing? Or we know we don't have enough bus drivers, how do we mitigate that? Those were not the types of things that, we were looking at. If it is something that should be part of a readiness plan, I think that would be, something for the administration to come up with, and we could look at it. And like you said,
Right.
ask
You're
those
not
tough,
gonna generate
ask those
it.
tough questions, okay, well, we noticed that this isn't included, should it be?
Dr. Dixon, do you have something to?
No, I just want to make sure that, Carol and I can kind of talk offline about who should generate these types of reports, should it be, internal audit that generating those reports? Because if it's us, then that will mean that we will have to stop, take away from some of the work we're currently doing to generate those reports. And so that is always the concern for me. So, we can talk offline about what that looks like, but I definitely don't want to add additional burden to the things that we're already doing for this, although acknowledging that this work is important. It's just kind of who are the people that's going to kind of generate and monitor and make sure that that information is there and accurate. That's important.
Yeah, I don't think we're so much talking about reports. I think we're talking about whether whatever that continuous operation plan is that already takes into account a tornado or a power outage, like stuff that we already have in place that, the way we got there, Dr. Dixon, is we were talking about, well, maybe it should have a pandemic chapter in it.
Correct. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I've been listening. Yeah, right,
Yeah,
right.
and
Good
so,
discussion too.
and that I think, whoever's responsible for emergency management would be the entity that would take that under control.
Possibly.
But, that the conversation evolved there, which is probably a useful conversation to have, because I was trying to lift up how to make sure when we have this good practice of you having engaged the Office of Internal Audit to do a readiness audit, and yet
Yes.
it seemed like some things were missed.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to go back and revisit that to say, how could we make sure that doesn't happen again? And I think that what's come out of that is that, I don't know that we've really even addressed that entirely, except that Mr. Jordan suggested, looking at best practices in other places in a broader scope than just what is currently on our list to do things, to make sure that we haven't forgotten anything, is one idea going forward. But then this other idea that we've wandered off our ranch of audit and accountability and into emergency
Yeah.
planning, and we'll just put a pin in that and talk about that part later.
And
Well,
if
I'd
I-
like to add that Mr. Jordan and I are sitting on another committee that we've been seeing some best practices from too. So I think you would concur too that that another board that we sit on, that I've been having some takeaways from too, that are doing this work that we can share out with Carolyn and the team.
Okay, terrific.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And if I may, I think when Mr. Jordan, like what he was talking about, the retrospective review, I think that's what kind of stirred this, and thinking about what did we put in place that was actually working for this scenario. But then to Mr. Daniels' point, we want to be proactive, right? Now that we know something like this can happen, we can't just one off and saying like, okay, we got through COVID, and if whatever didn't work, but we'll never have to deal with that again. And now that we know that something like this can happen and it can disrupt, how our kids learn every day, we do have to think through what we created. How did it really work for our students? So I think that's where the conversation led into like, well, let's talk to the people who were with our students, who are presently with our students on a day-to-day, so that they are also a part of that retrospective review and putting those best practices for, hopefully we'll never have to again, but if it's going to go in that COOP book, like just making sure that we are thinking about what actually did work for our kids and what didn't, what can we do to improve.
Okay. Well, that's a good discussion. Thank you. Next.
I think now I'm turning it over to Mr. O'Connor or
Yes.
someone else.
No, it's me.
All right.
And again, I'm sorry, I'm just getting over a cold. We wanted to go over the Internal Audit Awareness Month, which is May every year, and just some different activities that the community members might be aware of that they've done with their various organizations. Something we were talking about doing was actually trying to get with Dr. Dixon and her team and Stan and his team and get out to some management meetings and go over what internal audit does, the benefits it can bring an organization, go over some high-level risks that we see that are across the spectrum, just to touch base on things like that. But to get out amongst the people and do those type of presentations heavy in May and trying to build relationships going forward. But I'd be interested to hear anything anybody else, and we'll reach out to Mr. Vajon and Mr. Grant also as the community members to see if you guys have done anything that's been successful that we might be able to adopt.
That might require some thinking and getting
Yes.
back to them.
And
about how
that's
to-
fine.
Well, we have, actually I saw a first draft of it yesterday, so we've got a newsletter bulletin that's going to be going out to all the associates in the enterprise. We're going to be updating our internal audit internet site, our LinkedIn site to promote the awareness. And there's other minor things like that, but we're leveraging, those have seemed to work pretty well in the past. And I think Kevin's got a great idea. We always try to get out and promote internal audit and what it does, give a little background, because folks always change in the business, will change in the district. So just, you'll be seeing new people and keep that constant reminder. I think it's a great idea.
Very good. Well, if you have anything else, feel free to share with Carolyn and she'll get it to me. Thank you.
Okay, I think the next item, Kevin Sankowski is going to give a update on where we stand as far as the risk assessment work plan process.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone.
Hello.
Hello?
Just a quick thumbnail of where we stand in our risk assessment process and kind of what to expect here over about the next month or so. We're probably, I would say maybe we're probably about 96% complete with all of our reach out to management and follow up with management. We have a few outstanding items to gather based on the questionnaire we had sent out to management and the follow-up we were doing. So that's probably at about 96%. I've got probably about 85 to 86% of it actually put into our application, our risk assessment application, and it's starting to generate our impact and probability scores for each of the functions that we have identified in our audit universe. We've got about another week yet that next week Kevin and I are going to wrap up the ratings and scorings for impact and probability for each of the functions, as well as put together our actual audit plan for probably next week. We'll knock that out because we have a target deadline of getting the draft audit plan to Carolyn by the 4th of April. In which she'll turn around and give us her insight, and we'll make adjustments, all with the eye towards next month having a conference call, which is typically had been in May for Audit and Accountability, to have that conference call and give you the first look at our assessment and plan. And then, but we bumped it up a month just to try to improve some of our timing. So our eye is towards a conference call in late April to give you that first look. And right now, I think we're right on schedule with it. Got a lot of hard work to do next week to wrap it up, but I'm pretty confident that that's not going to be a problem, and we'll get it to Carolyn and we'll get it turned around. So the committee members should be looking for probably in the next few weeks or a week or so, at least before the conference call, that coming your way, and you'll have an opportunity to see that.
And just a question, so then the conference call is?
In April, and
With-
it's not a, there's no voting, it's really just in order to be able to get clarifying questions from us, because it's not a public meeting, so there's no voting that goes on. And then in May, it comes back for the vote.
Okay, and that conference call is to be scheduled, will be all of us or some of us, or how does that?
We're trying to make, well, the Auditor of State is planning to do their post-audit April 28th, so
Right.
we'd like to piggyback on that same day, so you
Okay,
don't
that's
have
what
to
I kind
hold
of thought,
multiple
okay.
dates.
So we'll have a meeting, it just won't be a public meeting?
Correct.
Okay. Got it, I thought so, and then the conference call thing was throwing me a bit. Okay, thanks.
Okay. Thanks, Kevin. Next week.
Certainly.
Go back to Mr. O'Connor for the internal audit activity, which is
All
up on the
righty.
screen and you have in your handouts.
Yes, so we'll start on page 3. I've made a couple changes. One requested by Stan to put the colors in front of the audits, so that worked out really well. Thanks, Stan. And then I didn't change anything else. Again, we're evaluating where the project status is based on planning, field work, and what's completed. So you can see each column there. That should coincide with the number in the box above it. One thing you won't see on here is at the last Audit and Accountability, we approved the IT, information security and incident response audit job. And because this is as of February 28th, we began that audit in March. So you'll see that in the next chart, which will be in May. Also in the project box, if you look at the bottom, you'll see NS and then QAIP. The QAIP is the Quality Assurance Improvement Program, and that is an audit standard we have to follow to evaluate our work here in internal audit. And the NS stands for not started. So that's where we stand with all that information. On page 4, there's no additions, deletions, or adjustments this month to our audit plan. So we will go to page 6. And this goes over the outstanding recommendations. This specific slide is for implemented and not verified items. And again, those are the things that management has told OIA they're ready for us to come in and review. And our focus has been high risk. So we've tried to get to those as best we can. And again, the information on this slide is categorized by operations, the superintendent, and treasurer. With our focus on high risk, we were able to address 27 of these high risk recommendations from the prior month. And since September 30th, OIA has validated 95 recommendations that were ready for our review. 53 of those were high, 33 of those were moderate, 9 were low. And you'll see down in the title of each column how many were closed since the last period. That's what that indicates. Slide 7. Again, these are recommendations that are in progress. So management is working on the corrective action plans and they're not currently ready for our review. And again, at the bottom of each column, I noted the change in the total because that could be things that were implemented, not verified, that when we went to go validate them, they didn't pass effectiveness. So they got bumped back down to in progress to have management rework those, or they could just be new recommendations that came on board and got into that category. Page 8 is just a list of all the audit and review recommendations made by external entities. And then on page 10, we have non-audit activities. These are continuing professional education events attended by OIA. And just wanted to highlight one on here. The Ohio Association of School Board Officials put on a nice webinar series about cybersecurity, et cetera. And we attended one called Honest Talk about a cybersecurity attack. And it had a panel of 2 high-level employees, CFO of Toledo Schools and a CFO of Apollo Career Center out in California. And these people walked through how they felt they were in really good shape, but a couple clicks by employees in email links changed everything, and they became victims of ransomware attacks. So this really gave us an explanation of what they did to right the ship, how long it took. They didn't pay the ransom, either one of them, and the lessons learned that maybe we can learn from, they talked about during this webinar. So we have shared that with our IT area, who had already seen it and routed it to staff, and also the treasurer's office leadership, just so they're aware of it also. Page 11, again, just advising and consulting activities we have done in the last month. And then the final page is 13. And again, that's just our table of organization and our budget information. So I'd be glad to take any questions anybody may have on this.
Kevin, it's Greg. I have a couple if you don't mind.
Sure.
Back on page 8, do any of the external recommendations have due dates on them? And if so, of this list of the 44, how many might be past due?
You know, as far as due dates, it would be according to that external entity, whether they wanted implementation dates. Some of them might, some of them don't. We've asked, like the Council of Great City Schools, we've had them put schedules together for us to give us almost a roadmap of when they think certain things will be ready for us to come in and help them with or review. But they aren't hard and fast like they are with our audit reports.
And what Dr. Dixon said to Hart, thinking about if management has to address internal audit issues in external, is there a way that to prioritize where resources get spent? That's just a question. We don't have to have an answer for it per se, but just.
I'm going to go out on a limb here a little bit in that I believe these external, well, most of them, the Council of Great City Schools for sure. I don't know what the top one is, fiscal year 20 AOS.
I'm the auditor of state.
Oh, okay, never mind. Yeah, okay, I do know what that is. The Council of Great City Schools, so those two that seem to have the lion's share of the items. they were at the initiation of management. So I think that they may look to the Office of Internal Audit to assist in, following up and making sure it doesn't fall through the cracks. But the
Right.
truth is, they're being used much more as an instrument to assist with the management plan than as an audit per se.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
that makes sense.
So I don't know that we need to be as concerned about that timing, because they sought the they sought the feedback and they're looking at it. And PDK isn't on here, but I know that they're definitely
Right.
using that as their road work, their roadmap.
Yeah, I can't recall, and without the materials,
Sure.
getting old, that which some of these may have control considerations or best practices. So it'd be the ones that would have control considerations. I guess I would be curious about within the outside parties. Again, we don't have to solve it tonight. It's just
Okay.
just trying to balance.
That's a good way to think
what-
about it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Then the last, I guess, comment or question, and it's probably more to Chair Beckerly. What is emerging now as a best practice is to have a ransomware policy. So I don't know that the board has a ransomware policy, but I would suggest that that's something that might make an agenda. And if so, what would be the critical assets that you'd want to have? Does the board want to have cryptocurrency and treasury to be able to pay for ransomware should it happen? I mean, that's
You're
why-
not kidding.
I'm not kidding at all, no.
You're saying we should have cryptocurrency?
Organizations do. I'm not saying what the
Wow.
district should or shouldn't have, but I do think you should consider this as a pretty key risk at this point. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of discussion, even very currently going on, as you've probably heard from the president and others. I mean, on a 5-point scale, I suggest we're probably somewhere between very close to 4 on the risk level for us. Yeah, with cyber risk. So just something to consider.
All right.
And I think, we could go around Columbus. There are examples of folks that have had to pay ransomware.
And it tends not to be public, right? Kind of a little under
It
the
crosses
radar.
all spectrums.
Yeah.
And
All
it's
right.
really, and I think it's part of the risk assessment and part of the conversation with IT ought to be, where are our critical assets? What are the critical assets? And the value to the organization, can we live without them? Do we have back? I mean, that whole process, I think would feed into a cyber risk ransomware policy. So in perspective, there's lots of research out there that, Carolyn's team could go work with, but as a suggestion, I would really strongly consider.
Okay. Thank you, I guess.
Yep. Well, otherwise.
No,
what
it's a
hap-
good suggestion.
No, it's a wonderful suggestion.
No,
I'm
that's
just
okay.
like,
That's okay.
more things to stay up at night about.
Well,
Thank you, though.
the alternative, which, and I appreciate that, is if it happens, then you're in another crisis management exercise about what do we do, and that's a whole other series of events.
Oh, no, absolutely.
Right.
And Stan probably has a perspective on
I
it
don't
too.
know.
To gather his perspective on that as well will be very important.
Anyone if Wanda and her team are here, or if we have any information about that, or we'll just take it as an action item.
From what Kevin said, we've had shared it with them, but we will definitely follow.
Okay, so this will be a follow-up.
I know we have, the cyber insurance, and I would have to look and see where we stand as far as a ransomware policy.
Yeah,
Okay.
And your cyber insurance policy may cover all that. I would suggest it'd be good to understand first dollar coverage and what's been reinsured by the carriers, because a lot of the international reinsurers now are carving out ransomware in their coverages. 2 other boards I'm on, we still have that coverage, but I think it's be important the amount, what it covers, what it doesn't cover, retention levels. So again, I think Stan could be a very good resource in this as well.
And I would imagine
Yeah,
Mr. Barnes.
prevention.
yeah. There's
I know
several
legals.
folks who could bring.
Involved in that also.
Yeah.
Okay.
But we can close the loop on that and find out, and if we don't have a policy, I'm sure the board will see that we do.
Okay.
Yeah, and you may or may not need one. It's just a suggestion that if not, then what's the series? What's the sequence you would follow from a governance perspective if an event were to occur?
Yeah.
Right.
Makes sense.
Even in terms of the decision-making even.
Correct.
Yeah, right. Okay, thank you.
That webinar that we did sit through, I mean, there were quite a few pain points that treasurer went through based on that ransomware activity. So that's why I thought it was important to share it with everybody, just so everybody could hear what they were going through.
Thank you.
Any other questions on the dashboard? All right, thank you.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Kevin. This next item, of course, there's a lot of emerging risk out there, but I thought I just wanted to briefly share what we are doing as a district to keep an eye on inflation. Every month, we have a Finance and Appropriations Committee that is facilitated by our treasurer, and our treasurer does thoroughly go over the budget to actual and any types of fluctuations that might have arisen. And to his credit, our treasurer is on the conservative side. So normally, there's enough in the budget to cover any type of unexpected blimps that we might have. He's on the line, so if he wants to jump in here, that's fine. But one of the things that we kind of pulled out from the budget was the fuel cost. We've all been hearing a lot about, increases in fuel. So we had a conversation with our COO, Mr. Odoms, as far as, how do we stand and are we prepared? Do we have enough in our budget to take us through the end of the year? And he came over and had a very thoughtful discussion with us, kind of went over how they're monitoring that on a monthly basis, how there is enough in the budget to carry us through the end of the year. So I feel pretty good as far as, that we ask the questions, that it is being monitored, and from what they have shared with me, we're in good shape as far as the fuel, and it's also being monitored as far as the budget to actual and any inflation concerns. But I do see Mr. Bahoric has cut on his video, so I'm assuming he wants to share something. And then Mr. Addison, or however you guys want to work it out.
Yeah.
I think it's Terry.
Thank you. Thank you, Treasurer Bahoric. Madam Internal Auditor, as you're talking, I just pulled it up. First of all, you're absolutely correct. We are monitoring the budget. We do budget conservatively, absolutely, to absorb any increases, any inflations throughout the year. We actually have a budget analyst in the Treasurer's office looking at that. As you know, we have a $1.7 billion budget. Of that budget, I just pulled it up real fast, $5 million of it is budgeted for fuel costs. And as of today, right now, we've spent $3.5 million, which means we have over $1.8 million left to go in the next 90 days, which is more than enough at this pace. We will definitely be under budget as far as the fuel expenses. But just a bigger picture overall, we do this for all of our utilities, water, gas, lights, electricity, all that stuff. So we do budget conservatively. We do keep an eye on it. And so we can pull it up at any time where we are in the process. And right now, as of today, 90 days to go, we are definitely on pace to be under budget.
Okay, great.
Just might offer, Stan, for your consideration, was in several conversations last week, and the topic was about inflation risk, and the recommendations were to go back. Many contracts, especially technology and outsourcing providers, excuse me, have the prices indexed to CPI. I know we're experiencing this review ourselves. So we may have budgeted 2.5% inflation, but the CPI may be 6 or 7 for a lot of the contracts that we have. And the other one was there's a lot of contracts that have been written over the years to have a price escalation clause built into them, and not necessarily tied to CPI, but allows based on certain parameters by provider, they can provide a cost increase. Then the question becomes, do you accept it, or do you try to find another provider? So just would offer that up just as a consideration set.
Yeah, Terry and I had that conversation this morning to attempt to look at the contracts to see, what those pricing mechanisms might be. And I had shared with Terry some of my previous experiences with other types of entities, and we even, our conversation covered those items that you mentioned as well as those entities, and we're not among them. But we talked about things like how do you mitigate that price increase risk? And I happen to be a consultant to one organization where they got involved in the futures market to, allay some of those fears. And we're not permitted to do that, but it all goes to what are the steps we can take to mitigate that. I've not delved into those contracts that we have currently, so that's something that we can certainly look at. But just a final point, the budget monitoring that we do is an ongoing process, and we don't just wait for an economic event to happen to assess how we're spending relative to current budget and relative to prior year activity. So, and as Carolyn mentioned, that's one of the things that if I see a blip, I bring it up at an FAC meeting. So, all good points and stuff to look at.
Yeah, you're spot on. You're focusing inflation around repair costs, machinery, lumber. I mean, you go through the whole gamut, and it's going to keep going. So it's industry-wide concerns. But thanks, Ann. Glad for the insights.
Yeah, and not to be what is that phrase? Not to be a Debbie Downer, but inflation is a huge conversation within our facility master plan.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Debbie.
Downer. Okay.
Yes, it is.
And then the next item I briefly kind of talked about, we do know that we do have some key positions and vacancies in the organization, and I haven't had a chance to actually have a conversation with our chief of talent management because he's very busy with some other things. But once I do have an opportunity to have that conversation, it'll be something similar. Just okay, we know we have these openings, and we've been talking about succession planning, talent management. What are we doing to get the right people in here at the right point in time? We're competing not just against other school districts. We're competing for talent with everyone. So I just put these on here just to kind of show, it's being monitored, and we're aware of it, and we're having the conversations. And as we learn information, we're bringing it back to the committee as appropriate. With that, actually, Mr. Reynolds from our treasurer's office is here to walk us through a high-level presentation of the annual comprehensive financial report. So if you can load that slide presentation. Yeah, there we go.
All right, thank you, Madam Auditor. Thank you, Madam
Carolyn.
Chair and Carolyn. Sorry.
Do we need to untable it, Carolyn? Do we need to untable?
I'm sorry.
Do we need to untable before the?
Oh, yes, we do, absolutely. Thank you, Greg. Can I entertain a motion to untable the discussion of the annual comprehensive financial report, the presentation?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Seeing no objections, the motion passed.
Okay, thank you again, everyone. I've been tasked, talked about the CAFR. I'm sorry, ACFR. I'm gonna apologize. I already made a mistake and called it a CAFR. Okay. Now this is our first year that it's actually called an ACFR, but that's all. So you go to the next slide. I can't control it here, so okay, here we go. All right, so what the ACFR is? So we know it's an acronym for Annual Comprehensive Financial Report. It's financial statements that they comply with the accounting requirements of GASB. They're audited by an independent auditor using general accepted accounting standards. Next slide. So the question is what is in the ACFR? There's 3 sections in it. There's an introductory section, there's a financial section, and a statistical section. Next slide. So within the introductory section, these are the elements that are in there. What I really want to highlight is the letter of transmittal. Within this report, this is where we talk about, student enrollment, demographics of our students, job industry in the greater Columbus area. We explain our major initiatives. We list the board's goals and guardrails. We
That always
touch
makes me
on
happy.
yeah, we touch on 5-year forecast. So basically, it just provides context of the understanding of the district and the community that supports it. So, and also there's charts that talks about the appointed officials, the organizational chart, and some of the awards that we will receive from the report, which I will show later on. Next slide. The financial section is where all the meat and potatoes is, if you want to say. That's where all the information is. So within that section, there's the independent auditor's report. That's when the independent auditor gives their opinion. For us, it's an unmodified opinion, which is a clean opinion. That's saying that our financial statements are fairly presented, which is an also thing for our district. There's also the management discussion and analysis, which we call the MD&A. That just provides a narrative of the financial statements at the management level. So, they do a lot. We do a lot of comparisons of, the audit year compared to the previous audit year, and we point out highlights things that may impact the financial statements. The basic financial statements. There's a few statements within there. So there's a government-wide financial statement, which is, which it shows the financial statement at a higher aspect of it. It combines all of the financial statements all together. And then behind those, there are the fund level statements, which are, a little bit more detailed because it lists, general fund, the debt service funds, the PI funds or whatnot. And then there's also a column that has, the combined funds on there, which that information, that leads to the combined statements is actually in the section where I have up there called other financial statements. So it's like combining financial statements, but in the back of the book or whatnot. Notes, pretty self-explanatory. The required supplementary information, which we call RSI. Basically, that information I will have like the BVA, budget versus actual information.
Oh, okay.
So that information is included in the RSI section. Next slide. So the third section is where the statistical data is. That's where we show like 10 years worth of expenditures, revenue, just all historical data. Readers can, go back and look at that statistical information to, determine our debt capacity. There's also information that talks about demographics, like our building statistics, like our school buildings, what year they were prepared, how many students are in them, things like that. Also, it goes in more detail about our student enrollment over the last 10 years. That information's back there. Number of employees, throughout the district, that information's back there over a long period of time. Next slide. So this slide here, instead of going through how to prepare an ACFR, I just put a picture up there because I look at this as like a marathon, So, so you can see that they're the first runner will represent the treasurer's office. We have the financial information. We have it in our system. We're making sure that everything is coded correctly. And, so we give it over to the next runner, which would be our conversion team. Now, we contract a conversion team. That's LGS, that's Local Governmental Services. They're our branch of the Auditor of State's Office, where they actually they do the conversions for local governments. So we contract with them to prepare our CAFR. We give them information, we review it, and see everything is good, and then, we move on to the next runner, which represents communications. Communications are the ones that, put all the, they put the pictures on the covers or whatnot, excuse me. And, just put all the communication that's in the transmittal letter. So then, once we hit the finish line, the report is done. The crowd, I just put the crowd up there. I put that to represent the board and the community cheering us on, getting the report together and whatnot. So just the thought, it takes us about 5 months. So we start the audit well, preparing the act for probably like in early August, and we finish all the way up. It takes us, our goal is always to finish before the winter holidays, because everybody wants to have a good Christmas and New Year. So that's always been a goal, so that's the finishing point. Next slide. This is just an example of the cover of this year's CAFR. ACFR, I'm sorry, I apologize
It's
earlier,
okay.
so.
All
Yeah,
right.
Old
ACFR.
habits.
Yeah. So that's that. You can go to the next slide. So just to think about some benefits of preparing an ACFR. Like I said, I brought the book in. You guys have probably seen it.
Yeah, I think we have a copy.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah. So,
It's actually on my shelf.
oh,
On my desk too.
good. So, yeah, it provides a lot of information for readers to understand what's going on with the district, making sure that we're, financial stable to, pay our bills or whatnot. The next thing, it helps us stay in compliance with our bond covenants. Our bond holders, they require us to, prepare an ACFR. Also having good standing with the credit rating companies. I actually received an email from Moody's asking about our ACFR, but that was asking if our audit has been finalized. So once we have the post audit, I can
Right,
get
right,
that
right.
information there.
And are we AA or our bond rating? Are we,
I'm not sure. Stan, would you? have to know?
Double A.
okay, which is very good.
Also, we can participate in peer reviews with GFOA and ASBO. Just making sure that we're maintaining the high standards. So getting evaluated by your peers is also a good thing. We actually receive awards from that. If you go to the next slide, these are the examples of rewards that we will receive from having fairly stated financial statements. And those are also put in our ACFR. I believe that's all I have. Is there any questions? You can go to the next slide. Yes, that's it. Any questions or anything?
I mean, just a big thank you. Is that, the inflation might be keeping me up, but this is helping me sleep. But yeah, Stan's got something.
As Tito pointed out, the work on the ACFR begins, in the late summer, in that August, after you get the books closed for one fiscal year, you then begin to compile that information. And so for this report, if my dates are correct, Tito joined the organization right around Labor Day. And so he had to jump in with both feet in a brand new organization to figure out how we get this done. So to his credit, we got that done, on time, and it's complete and it's going to pass muster. I believe I'm going to say probably over 30 years that the district has prepared an ACFR and has received those awards for excellence in financial reporting. The document goes to those two organizations, and it goes through a rigorous peer review of other professionals in the business, and they have to, I don't know whether it's sign off on it, but they'll make comments on it to make sure that we are in compliance with the rules for reporting, but also the format. There's a whole litany of formatting issues and content issues that we have to make sure that we conform with. So, it's a team effort. We have to reach out across other departments to pull some information in. As Tito mentioned, communications does some writing. I do some writing. So it's not just a one-man show, but he spearheads that to make sure that we get that done and we get it to the auditors and everything is as it should be. So that's your ACFR.
Thank you. Any questions?
Oh, it's great. Thanks for the overview. Very helpful.
Appreciate it. And then I guess I would like to entertain another motion to untable the overview of GASB 87, 8, 94, 96, 98.
So moved.
Second?
Seeing no objection, we will untable.
Okay. Last but not least, I really just wanted to go over some standards that have been issued by the Governmental Accounting Standards Boards that will either immediately are impacting the organization, or they will be within the next year. So as I sent you in the email last night, when I do this with my full 50 minutes, I go through all the slides. I'm not going to do that to you all.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll start off on page 3. On slide 3, please. Thank you. So the first standard that I want to touch on is GASB 87, and that is how to account for leases. In Treasurer's office, correct me if I'm wrong on this, we don't lease a lot. We own,
Yes.
on most of our buildings, if not all of our buildings. We own all of our white fleet, all of our yellow fleet, all of our, most of our equipment. The only thing that I can think that we lease would be copiers. There might be something else.
Copiers, you're right.
So in that regard, we are very lucky with GASB 87. Other organizations that do lease a lot have had some challenges with implementing this standard. So what is it? The board, the GASB board, issued Statement 87 to improve lease accounting and financial reporting. One of the things under the old standard, you had to account for leases in 3 ways. You had your operating leases, your capital leases, and your financing leases. This standard does away with that. Why did we do this? And I can say we because I guess I'm a part of this. The prior standards were decades old, and they were established before the GASB had come up with concept statements to guide how we are to go about establishing standards. So a lot of what was under leases was kind of rules-based versus principle-based. So stepping back, this gave us an opportunity to come up with a standard that was principle-based and is in alignment with the concepts that, we are following to date. When effective for fiscal years beginning after June 15th, 2021. So that means it would be effective for us as of this year that we are currently in. Like I said, luckily for us, it's not a lot that I think for us to undergo. I'm speaking as someone who doesn't prepare this, so.
Yeah, we work with LGS. We talked about this, so yeah.
Okay.
I've been working with purchasing to get those lease for those copiers, and also for the buildings that we leased out. I got that
Correct.
information from Capital Improvement. So.
Correct, yeah, we do lease some buildings, so, those entities would have to comply with this standard. And then the only other thing that I thought about is WCBE and the licensing arrangement for the towers. Just kind of give that some thought. Okay. Next, if we can go to slide 6. I really just want to go over the definition of a lease. A lease is a contract that conveys control of the right to use another entity's non-financial assets for a period of time in exchange or exchange-like transactions. So you're going to hear a very similar definition when we go to Statement 94 and Statement 96. So Statement 94, which we'll get to in 96, were things that didn't fit neatly into Statement 87, so we kind of carved out 2 additional statements to cover those particular and unique circumstances. And the only other thing is leases are financing of the right to use an underlying asset. And as I said before, we have eliminated the distinction between capital and operating. It's either a lease, and the only other thing is if it's a short-term lease, then you don't have to worry about this. You can go ahead and just expense that. But if it's a long-term lease, it comes under Statement 87. The next page is page 12. I just want to briefly mention other topics that are covered under Statement 87. You see there are disclosure requirements that have to be made, contract combinations, lease incentives, subleases, sales leasebacks, and leasebacks. So it's a very thick standard. There's been a lot of professional development that's happened ever since it's been issued. And hopefully, because it's in effect, right now, hopefully everybody is ready for it. And then the last page is page 13. One of the wonderful things that GASB does do, they give guidance on implementation of standards. So there's already been some guidance issued on Statement 87, even though it's not actually been implemented just yet. Another thing that GASB is really, I think, wonderful to do, if there are questions, they have a technical assistance line, and people can call and actually speak to someone, not me, someone else, and get help on or answers to their questions. So that was all that I had planned to go over on Statement 87. Hopefully it's, enough to just kind of make everybody aware that it is out there. Luckily for us, it's not as much of a challenge as it is for some organizations. I did ask the Auditor of State, I said, well, how's it going for other entities? And he said, for a lot of entities, it's the gathering of the documentation. And then for those whose documents were not written as leases, they have to figure out what that interest rate is. They have to come up with some type of way to calculate that interest. So that's been the most challenge for a lot of organizations. Okay, and now we'll go on to public-private and public-public partnerships. We'll go to slide 15. This is going to be real brief because I could not think of how this applied to us, but you guys might have something that comes to mind. I couldn't think of anything. So anywho, this would be more, I'm thinking like maybe in Ohio State that has engaged another party to run their garages, or they have some type of deal with their utilities. This would be more applicable in those type of situations. So once again, I'm just going to go over what it is, the board issue guidance for public, private, and public partnerships that are not subject to statement number 60, which I won't go into, or statement number 87. So this was kind of a carve out that didn't fit neatly into 87. It's effective for periods beginning after June 15th, 2022. We can go to page 16. And once again, the definition, there are arrangements in which governments, the transferor, contracts with an operator, governmental or non-governmental, to provide public services by conveying control of the right to operate a non-financial asset such as infrastructure or other capital assets for a period of time in exchange or in exchange-like transactions. So I'm not going to spend much more time on that. Once again, the same help is out there. We probably will have implementation guidance, and if we do run across something, and if there's questions, you can always call the technical assistance line. We can go to page 21. I do think this one will have implications for the district. This is subscription-based information technology arrangements. Once again, a kind of a carve-out that didn't fit neatly in 87. What is it? The standard issues relating to subscription-based information technology arrangements such as cloud computing contracts. I'm thinking our ERP system, I'm thinking Infinite Campus. There's probably some other software that we are using that we don't own. And we, yeah, so there's probably a lot of, when we start looking at this one, it might be a lot to look at. Why? Stakeholders were concerned that those transactions were not covered by the guidance in Statement 51, which deals with internally generated software, or 87, which is leases. And because of no guidance, there's diversity in practice. Effective date for years beginning after June 15th, 2022, and all reporting periods thereafter. There might be some entities that are reporting on an interim basis, so that's why this is a little bit different as far as the implementation dates than the previous two. Let's go to slide 22. Once again, it's the subscription-based information technology arrangements. SBITA is a contract that conveys control of the right to use another party's IT software alone or in combination with tangible capital assets as specified in the contract for a period of time in an exchange or exchange-like transaction. And if we can go to slide 23. I just want to hit on that this does not apply to governments that provide the right to use their IT software and associated tangible assets to other entities through SBITAs. It does not apply to contracts that meet the definition of a P3 in Statement 94. And this last one, it does not apply to licensing arrangements that provide a perpetual license to governments to use a vendor's computer software, which are subject to Statement 51. That was all I was going to go over, but I do think this one will have an impact on the district. And last but not least, if we can go to slide 27. And as you just heard, what used to be the comprehensive annual financial report is now called the annual comprehensive financial report. And what the board has renamed the financial report in response to stakeholders who pointed out that its acronym, as commonly was pronounced, sound like a highly offensive racial slur, particularly against Black South Africans. Why? The GASB's committed to diversity and inclusion dictate that its standards should be free of potentially offensive terminology. And it's effective with fiscal years ending after December 15th, 2021, and early application is encouraged, and we've seen a lot of early, people were kind of like biting at the chops for this one to be implemented, so. You can go to slide 29. I'll be happy to take any questions.
So on Statement 96, so like if you're using Microsoft Office, that would be apply, right? It's a subscription service that gets capitalized or other types of
Yes.
software where you're based, user-based license, right?
Yes.
That's my interpretation of it, yeah.
Yeah, so it's going to impact everyone, but some organizations more heavily
Right.
than others.
Then the question falls back on, is it material enough
Correct.
to do all that,
All-
that work for?
All of the standards have a material, what we call a
Right.
materiality box.
Yep.
If it's not material, then you don't have to go through all these hoops. If it is, then you have to comply with the standards in order to get those lovely awards that we've been getting for all these years.
Yeah, they pretty much mirror gap.
Right, that's
Yeah,
it, yeah.
yeah.
So that's my
Okay.
GAP update, my GASB update.
All right. I think if there's nothing else that anyone would like to bring up, we're ready to adjourn. Just to note that the Order of State's post-audit is conference is April 28th, 2:30 via Zoom. And then our next meeting is May 26th, 3:30 here. And on the 28th, or after that, are we to expect that there might be a conference to talk about the
Yes, the risk assessment.
risk assessment? Okay,
That
so
communication out.
we might not just be done after the Order of State
Correct.
presentation.
Yeah, I think it's on the calendar already,
Yeah.
I believe.
The other one is?
Yeah.
Conferences, okay, terrific. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved?
Second.
All right, seeing no opposition, we are adjourned. Thank you all very, very much.